And we're live. Welcome everyone to our show, Get Me Someone Who Can Sell. I'm Olga Pishnyanka. I'm your host, and I'm the founder of Revenue Hire. That's the company I've been running for 11 years. And my guest today is Chris Schaum. And Chris, you go by Chris or Christopher? How do you like?
Chris.
Chris. And Chris is a treat. So I recorded a video about you yesterday. And I'm so pumped. I kept hearing about Chris. I got to have him on the show. I got to have him on the show. And I was like, okay, Chris, can you please do it? And he's a good sport. And he said yes. So Chris is super impressive. He is the executive whisperer. And if you wonder, like, what does that mean? He knows how to close 7-figure deals and 7+ figure deals. So he is the expert and the pro and the master. He's got a framework on how to close bigger deals consistently. And today we're going to talk a lot about how he became that way and what did that mean for his career. And more importantly, how can you do the same thing? So our show is mostly for entrepreneurs and CEOs of growing companies that want to understand how to hire somebody who is a strong salesperson or how to build a strong sales team. So what I want our audience to listen to is what does someone like Chris sound like, right? What do they act like? What do they talk about? What's important to them? So when you are interviewing your next salesperson next, you kind of know what questions to ask and more importantly, what to listen for. Because Chris is going to give us a lot of secrets today and a lot of interesting things. He's got a super impressive career. I'm sure he'll talk more about that. You can look at him on LinkedIn, super impressive guy. And he's got the framework that he's going to talk to us about today. Anything I missed, like important stuff? All right.
No.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Olga.
So usually the first question I like to ask is, what interested you about sales and how did you know that you would be any good at it?
Oh gosh. I had zero interest in sales starting out. Just to shoot you straight.
Tell me more.
I had the privilege of going to TCU, go Frogs, if anybody's out there, up in Fort Worth, and I had no clue what I wanted to do with my career. I thought I would just kind of get a college degree and then go work for some company and get into like some type of middle management position. And that would be like it, like, hey, that's a great career. And there's nothing against that. And at the same time, I had a mentor of mine, I had a couple of mentors of mine, one of which was a guy named David Miner, who said, look, the two best careers you can have, you know, outside of like doing high finance and joining a hedge fund, is to either be an entrepreneur or to be a sales guy. And so if you don't know what type of business you want to own or start, go get into sales. And I was like, well, all right, that sounds great. And truth be told, I hated it for a really, really long time. Like my first like 18 months to 2 years in sales, I absolutely hated everything about it. I felt nervous. I felt awkward. And there was a shift that happened along the way, but like out of the gate, I freaking, it was not for me at all.
Did you not enjoy the process of it? Did you not enjoy the rejection? Like what part of it did you didn't enjoy?
I didn't enjoy the, what did I not like about it specifically? One, like it took me, I didn't like being out of my comfort zone all the time. So part of it was just learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And then I didn't like I found out, I guess would be the easiest way to say that, I wasn't a good fit for business to consumer. I started out my sales career at an incredible organization, State Farm, in their leadership development program. And part of that leadership development program was working in these like top tier State Farm agencies. These guys made tons and tons of money, and learning how to sell, working with those guys. And I just didn't, as the kids would say, I didn't vibe with the business to consumer sale. What I ended up really liking was more of the business strategy side of things. And when I moved into B2B sales, when I learned, oh, you can use your like business strategy mind to do business to business deals, everything changed for me. And it just
Wait,
became
hold on. This is important. So you didn't enjoy sales. You joined State Farm.
Yeah.
They had, I'm assuming, a pretty good sales training program.
Incredible one. Yeah.
Right. So you learned the basics of how to do it.
Yeah.
Tried the B2C and you're like, no, it's not for me.
Nope.
And then what? How did you start selling 7-figure deals? Did it happen right
God.
away? Or
That
did you
didn't happen for years. That was probably another 4 years out. Till I ever did anything that big. No. So I was at State Farm for 3 years. Incredible training program. Learned everything from, all the good Sandler stuff. They, as part of my continuing education program, helped pay for me to go work towards getting my chartered financial analyst, which is like the big hedge fund, private equity designation. So they taught me everything there is to know about corporate finance, and investing. And then that season of life was coming to an end, and I started applying, thanks to my wife, for startup jobs in Austin. And she literally we were sitting at our tiny apartment in Fort Worth, and she says, "What's that magazine you read and that website you always go on, like Inc?" And I was like, "Yeah." She says, "Don't they have like a business list, like that Inc. 500 thing?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, why don't you see if you can't find like an Inc. 500 job in Austin?" Because we wanted to move to Austin because Austin was cool 15 years ago. It's still cool now.
Yeah.
And so I just cold started applying to a bunch of companies that were hiring salespeople and marketing.
Was that Zebra? Is that what you got?
Yeah, that's how I got to Zebra. And a guy who was actually texting with earlier today, he's a good friend of mine to this day, Dave Perry, took a chance on me and hired me to come sell for him at Zebra. And it was the first time I got to apply, the toolkit that I learned at TCU, years and years of just talking to older people, because I was like the lonely, awkward kid. The finance stuff I learned at State Farm, the sales process I learned at State Farm. And, when I was there, I did everything from transactions with, big oil and gas companies, to Sega, the entertainment business, to, big government agencies. And so, yeah, that was my first.
How big was the sales team when you first started there?
There was one person. They grew to 2. It was me and one other person, and then I believe I did like 72% of the revenue.
Oh my God!
When I was there.
Tell us more about that. Like, that's because you weren't there for that long, right?
Yeah, I was only there for about 18 months.
And then, so what did you do in that 18 months? Like, what did you accomplish? Like, their revenue was like, were they over $1 million at that point? I don't know if you can share, but
well, I can't share because a lot of it was government.
Oh, I got it.
But it was a good size number, especially for the size of the business. And we did a lot of deals. So it was everything from working with, tons and tons of oil and gas companies, like just driving back and forth from Austin to Houston over and over and over again.
Yeah.
To selling into South Korea, selling into Japan,
So
Turkey,
you went from B2C
mm-hmm.
to somebody took a chance on you.
Yeah.
To get you into B2B, but because you had the sales training and you had the methodology they used, was that an easy transition for you? Like, that's a big chance to take on somebody, right?
I think the big switch, it was my first sale. I'll never forget. It was a aerial imagery and GIS government contractor out of the Mid-Atlantic, and the buyer I was working with said, "Oh my gosh, Chris, you're going to make me look like a rock star." And I was like, like this is actually helping a company achieve their strategic objectives. It's helping this person advance their career, and it's helping my business. Like, this is a triple bottom line. This is pretty cool. And that just like lit this fire underneath me that I was like, oh, this is fun. Like, I'm not, and no disrespect to the insurance industry, right? I have a ton of clients in the insurance world now. Once again, just was not for me. But it was just a different was a different thing. And it really kind of lit this fire into me of, oh, like, this is really kind of cool. And then you do another one, and you do another one, and you do another one. And yeah, it was awesome.
So did you use the same framework you used at State Farm, like in there, or did you have to adjust and change and like learn from the CEO? Because were you reporting directly to the CEO, or did you? Okay.
I report, Dave was VP of sales and like biz dev, because there was a lot of like big strategic things we were doing at the time. Not we, there was no we in that he was doing at the time. I asked to get involved in that. He was like, nah, just keep selling. I was like, okay. But a lot of it translated from business to consumer to business to business. The biggest thing was I would just go and I would ask Dave, like, what questions should I be asking? He'd be like, well, you should go talk to them about how they're going to make this decision. Go talk to them about how they're going to, like, what their buying process is like. Are you going to go through contracts? Are you going to go through procurement? Like, you got to talk to accounting. And he just like helped me, like, was really gracious and taught me how businesses buy things.
Mm-hmm.
And once I overlaid, how like a basic buying framework, like a Sandler, with, how companies purchase things, it really became pretty straightforward. And then it was just learning how to sell and ask questions about how things were going to be applied and how clients were going to get their money back from spending with me. It was never about, oh, cool, you're spending 30 grand or 40 grand or 100 grand, whatever it was. It was like, what are you guys going to do with this? And just getting really comfortable asking the really uncomfortable questions. And that was something that I took from State Farm, was you had to be like, there was a season of my time there where we were selling life insurance. And that is one of the most intimate sales ever. You're sitting down with normally it's a couple, and asking them everything, all the awkward questions about their personal finances and what's going to happen when the primary earner dies, and getting comfortable sitting in that awkwardness. I mean, doing that, like, there's nothing more awkward and uncomfortable than that, in my opinion. And so being able to translate that, like, if you could stomach that, it became really easy to talk to them.
You can do B2B sales.
The outcome for this to be successful, no one has to die, right? And so, like, I'm not talking to a young husband and wife at some desk in Fort Worth talking about, like, well, what happens if he doesn't come home one day? Like, it's not talking to accounting.
So is that the first place you closed your first 7-figure business, or what did this actually? What did it happen?
7-figure deal I was a part of was when we got to Brightergy. And that's when we were doing much larger solar energy systems.
Were you recruited away, or did you like, this was your next kind of step? Because
no, I wasn't necessarily. One could call it recruited. I ended up, we had a young kiddo. My daughter was relatively young at the time, and we wanted to move to be closer to family. And it just so happened that we went and stayed with one of my wife's friends, and we were on a walk around the neighborhood, and I ran into Adam Blake, who I went to TCU with. And we were just catching up at a yard sale. And I was like, well, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, I'm building this solar energy company. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Like, he would want to get like, I was like, and he's like, no, like, we should actually talk about this. Like, there's a really big business opportunity and I need good people. And I was like, okay. And like, I knew Adam and I weren't like close friends. Like, we knew each other, and I knew of him because we ran in the same circles and we had the same mentor, that David Miner guy. And he was like, look, this could work. And so he ended up making me an offer that made a ton of sense. And
gotcha.
That was the thing. And I was like, that was my first time that I got to be a part of actually building something. And I think I was employee number 11 or 12 there.
It says 12 on your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So, and you started as just a salesperson, and then it looks like you got promoted at least twice in there. That's what it says in your thing. So you must have been doing a lot of great things there. So how in the world do you figure this out? Like, you've never done this before. How did you do it? Like, how did you keep moving on and into this roles?
I just said yes. Like, when I joined I had never sold solar before, but I understood how businesses bought things at that point, right? So if you look at like the equation of the advancement of my degree, right? Like I learned the basics of sales and finance, and then I paired that with learning how to prospect and get in front of executive buyers at Zebra, because I was cold calling and closing deals. It was full cycle. There was no BDR team or anything like that. To then getting to Brightergy and saying, okay, well, like I can prospect and I know how to ask the important business questions. And then it was one of those things where like a lot of it, call it God's grace, call it luck. It was just fortuitous of getting on with some incredibly hardworking, driven people and getting to get on that rocket ship. I mean, like, and just saying yes along the way. Like Adam would be like, look, can you do this? And I would say, yeah, sure. I'll figure it out.
I like that. You're like, yeah. Wait, so when do you remember how, so it was 12 employees, you got it to 50 million. What, can you tell me where you started the revenue wise?
Yeah, it was a million. It was 1 million.
Holy cow. So you went from 1 million to 50 million
and that's
in 5 years.
In 3. And that was in net new revenue. There was no recurring revenue in that.
Right.
That was just net new sales.
Okay, I have questions about all that. So
yeah.
what was your playbook? What was your success formula there? How did you do it?
In complete transparency, right? So I started off as a sales guy, and I was like a sales guy plus like a project monkey. So I would we worked on everything from
you're like a dream first salesperson employee. This is what it is.
It was everything from selling to Salesforce infrastructure because I also learned data engineering and systems architecture at State Farm. That's a whole other 9-month side quest I went on. But I learned all that. So I was doing everything from sales and marketing and Salesforce infrastructure to then just sales. So I did a bunch of sales and other stuff for like 9 months or so. And then I just went and sold. And I was just a quota carrying salesperson. And we were selling, our average sales price was like, I think like $150,000 was just a lot of $150,000 deals. And then Adam was and is like one of the best leaders I've ever worked with. And he had an incredible VP of sales who I worked under both of those guys, and just learned how to grind. And because that's all it was. It was just a ton of, $90,000 to $150,000 deals for the first year or so. And then they started building this infrastructure around it and a playbook around it, and hired some amazing salespeople. There was like, I think when I went into leadership, and I'm going to get this number wrong, there were like 5 or 6 salespeople at the time. And I'm not going to remember all of them, like John Conger, Jason Aids, all these guys were just freaking killers, like amazing people to feed off of and learn off of. And yeah, they just did an amazing job. And the whole process there that we figured out, and that one of the things that I helped work on a lot was how to turn one of the things I was really lucky to contribute was taking it from just being a sales process to we literally made it an investment process. And because a lot of the solar sale at the time, and it's still today, was based off of you had a capital allocation. So a company's going to write us a check, and then in return they're going to be offsetting a known cost, which is electricity. They were going to be getting, and that was going to be on a 25-year asset. And they were also going to be getting a lot of tax benefits through tax credits and depreciation. And so literally working and building out the like Excel investment proposal. So here's your internal rate of return you're going to get from it. And I built out the sales process there, and then we rolled that out to the salespeople of, hey, you're not selling solar. We're selling an asset with a really good return that's backed by tax credits from the federal government, law that's going to get us, Section 179 depreciation that they can take, and then these big long-term warranties from the manufacturers. And we were only selling high-quality equipment. At the time, there was a lot of lower quality stuff coming into the market. And Adam made a really smart decision to only buy tier 1 equipment and to take it on the chin from a margin standpoint to do that. And that allowed us to have this investment. And so we literally built this actually pretty nice at the time, a multi-page PDF Excel model that we would go in and we would sell to CFOs. And so it was selling to CEOs and business owners and CFOs of this investment in energy independence. And it worked really, really good.
So do you think it helped you go get the average deal size from whatever it was to higher doing it that way? Or is that?
Yeah, it definitely drove it up. And then the second part to that was so there were two things that allowed us to do that. One was we had that definitely helped. And then there was a JV that was structured with a big global engineering firm called Black & Veatch that helped our credibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was some financing that Adam secured that allowed us to create like a lease or a finance product. And from there, like it was just game on, let's go.
So you were an individual contributor there, right? Or did you actually manage the team?
So I was an individual contributor there, and then I was on or around the same time I did my first, call it 7-figure deal with a big company called Saya. It was this big solar development out in North Carolina. For them, they're a big publicly traded company. And then Adam came to me and he said, look, I'd like you to help. We've got this, it was before SDRs were even a thing. So we've got this inside sales team.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love it if you can just take it over. And I was like, okay, sure. When? He was like, how's tomorrow sound? And so I ended up going from never having any formal managerial experience to having, I think, 6 or 7 direct reports, and we grew that to 17 at the peak. And so that was my first experience, was building the SDR organization there across Kansas City, St. Louis, and Boston. And we built this entire machine that I knew with a 90% confidence, if we could forecast sales and revenue off the system we built, and I built that, depending on the number of, the amount of activity from our inside sales team to meet accepted meetings, I would know what our revenue was going to be 9 months in advance.
Wow.
It became that highly processed, and I architected and built that entire machine.
It's impressive. So what part of 50 million was that? Was that part of the 50 million, or was that the 50 million that you got it to after?
So we got that probably took us from 22 to around the 50 or so. And we sold a lot more than 50 million. We ended up having some contractual issues with some incentive structures that got pulled back. But yeah, that was part of it. So at the time I was doing sales and managing that organization as well. And we had Adam built out a really good outside sales organization that fed into as well.
So I want to point something out to those who are watching this. When you interview an amazing salesperson, and I hope you're noticing this with Chris, they love talking about numbers. In fact, their story has numbers as they tell the story. There's not going to be a lot of vagueness. Even, I don't know if you noticed when he said, I can't talk about specific numbers, he can still translate what he did in something that has numbers around it, even if he can't talk about the revenue or some confidential information. So that's one of the things I just want to kind of showcase you in the way that I didn't train him. I didn't prepare him for this. That's how they talk. They talk with numbers. That's the story they tell. And in fact, if somebody doesn't tell you the numbers or the story with numbers, that's something is not right there. So they're usually very proud of their accomplishment. And if if they messed up, they will be proud of the mistakes as well. so,
Yeah.
so,
Oh, I screwed up a ton.
oh, I'm sure. And
We can
we'll talk about that.
definitely talk about that.
We'll talk about that. But I want to hear this one. So before we get there, this is a very important thing for me. Like for you as a salesperson, closing that first 7-figure deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you think happened to your mindset? Like, do you remember when it happened? How it happened? Like, do you think like that's something that changed in you? Like, what was this like? Oh, like what happened after you closed that first deal? Big one.
A couple of things. Smaller deals lost their luster, like immediately.
They lost their what?
Luster, like they became less interesting.
Oh, gotcha.
I had to work to get that back. That's
Yeah.
not there today. Now I like all revenue.
Yeah.
But like immediately, like everything else became less cool. And to your point on the numbers, like I remember the exact dollar amount of that deal.
I bet.
And like I remember exactly where I was when it closed. I remember all of that. And I think like the big thing there for me was it was this culmination of everything, all of the skill sets I had to get there, right? So that deal is actually a really interesting story because it was a deal that took a long time. It was one that I cultivated, gave up and handed off to another salesperson because I moved into leadership, and I couldn't keep fostering it. And then it got to a point where the sales rep at the time that was managing it, he literally said one day he had another deal that he was more confident in that was going to close that was conflicting with a site visit for it. And I still knew the leadership team at SIA at the time that was managing the project. And I was like, hey, are you going to the site visit tomorrow? He's like, no, I'm canceled. I'm not showing on it. I'm going to get all the info and I'll apply for it later. And I literally walked into Adam's office, the CEO, and I said, this happened. I need to get to North Carolina. I wasn't working the account. I wasn't doing it anymore.
Wow.
I serviced this client. I was like, I need to go. And he was like, go buy a plane ticket, get out of here. And I called my wife and I said, hey, I need to go to North Carolina tonight. That SIA deal, the reps dropping the ball on it. And she said, no problem. She did the most incredible thing. She literally packed a suitcase for me. We had young kids at the time. And I ran home, got my suitcase from her and went immediately to the airport. Got in at like 2 a.m. and showed up at the site visit. And the interesting thing here, when it got to the site visit, we did this whole big engineering study. I didn't have an engineer with me, but all these other massive companies had these engineers. And I paid attention to two things that were really important. One, like I immediately clarified when I got there that everybody was going to be getting the same engineering docs and that everything was going to be cited and surveyed. And I called our guy and I said, look, can we get aerial imagery on this and satellite imagery on this to double check everything? He said, yeah, sure. I said, okay, great. We get there and everyone that was there were probably like 12. There was a lot of companies there bidding the project. And keep in mind, I had put this deal together that got to the point that it went to RFP. And I spent all of my time, we literally have this meeting with everyone bidding, and then everybody disperses to do site measurements and visits and stuff like that. And all the other sales guys and engineers scatter. And I spent all of my time with the buyers. And I walked around with them, asking them questions about what was important to them about the deal.
Wow.
How are they going to benefit for it? Like what was going to go to harken back to the Zebra deal? Like, how could I help them look like rock stars with this project? Like what was going to be really important to them in the deal? And I used that 45-minute site visit to really go deep on not the specs for the project, which is what everybody else was there for, but was to understand exactly what was going to help that customer win in the marketplace with the deal. And what I ended up learning was the most important thing was not the cheapest project, right? They were a publicly traded business. They wanted their executive team to be able to do press talking about how they were doing this class leading partnership with world-class materials that was going to take their business from an image standpoint, at the time, LTL trucking, which was the business, like big 18-wheelers and under 750-mile radiuses. I studied their industry to figure it out, right? Was getting a bad rap for emissions, and they wanted to have a clean energy project that they could point to, and they could talk about on earnings calls and things like that, and on press releases, and to talk with their clients of, hey, Saia is making this effort to become more green. This is our pilot project. And so then I learned about how that executive I was talking to at the time, all of his processes and the game that was going to be played out behind closed doors, who the buyers were, how it was going to be evaluated, what was important from a bonding standpoint, what was in bonding being like actual insurance bonding, under not just the minimums, but what was going to be preferable, what the reporting and additional stuff that could be done. So we built this package surrounding them and surrounding all of those goals. And we were not the low bid by any means, but we ended up tying it to everything else that was important to the deal. And
Wow.
that is what ended up being really important with that first one, was seeing, it's a combination of the investment, the people, and what's important to them specifically, right? There was a lot of people that were out there trying to get all these other things that they thought were important, right? And no one, literally, I watched everybody scatter around to get all the information they needed for a bid, and no one spent time with those guys that were actually there but me. And I just walked around, took some notes.
How many people were there? I mean, I don't know. How many?
There were probably about 12 or 13 people there.
So what you did you do this by intentionally, or?
100%.
So that was your intention. I'm staying with these buyers. I'm not going to go.
100%. It was all about the relationship, and it was all about figuring out what was going to make it a win for them. Personal. And this is important. Make it a win for their company and for them personally.
Right.
It was the first time that I started asking the questions about, how is this going to help you meet your KPIs for your role for the year, so you get your bonuses and you get the promotion? Like, how can we leverage this transaction into your career goals? And I literally walked around this roof, walked around this whole big shipping yard, asking those questions of the guys. Or everybody else would come by and be like, hey, what about the racking system? What type of racking system do you guys prefer? Tell me about the parapet, like the dividers.
Right. So they stay surface like.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, over there, you're infiltrating the.
And I literally asked, like, hey, can I email you guys and follow up on some of the advanced engineering stuff we need to? Like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I knew immediately I was going to be able to go back and ask all those questions if I needed to, but I wasn't going to get that time to understand all of that stuff again. And that's what I ended up doing.
That's impressive. So you focused on making them look like a hero to their company instead of you being the hero.
Yeah. Who gives a crap about me?
Exactly. Right.
At the end of the day.
Thank you. That's very important. So do you think what you've done, do you think it's possible in today's day and age to do that without physically being with people? Okay.
Definitely. So I've done that so many times.
Without being face to face, like doing this virtually, doing on the phone or whatever.
Yeah, I had the privilege of putting together a deal with a big investment fund years later at BuildFax. And I'll never forget, I was sitting on my driveway in Austin on the phone with this hedge fund titan, like this one of these like legends in the industry. And I literally just asked him, I was like, how do we make this deal hit every one of your bonus characteristics for the year? Like, walk me through how you're going to hit all of your goals for the year. And I said, can we do this deal if I can help you meet all of those performance KPIs? And he had a number of things that he needed to put together in order that were just these, like, not random, they were very intentional KPIs for their business. And I figured out how to weave our deal into hitting as many of those as humanly possible. And that ended up doing it. And I said, look, I will. And I said, here's my KPI. I need a 7-figure contract. And I said, if I can get you all of those KPIs for your end of year performance review. Can we make this a 7-figure deal? And he said, yeah, we can do that. It wasn't that simple, but yeah. So yeah, you can totally do it. Not there in person. He was in New York and I was in Austin, Texas, sitting on a driveway outside in the middle of
there you go. Cause I know some people will be like, well, it's easy when you're face to face and what about when you're not there? Okay. So you have an interesting claim on your in your LinkedIn that you have the record holder. Maybe it was on your sales course. I don't know when I saw it, but you sold the biggest deal at 3 of the companies you worked at.
That's true.
So I don't know if you can tell us about
so I sold I did the largest cash transaction at Brightergy, which is that solar deal we were just talking about. I did the largest transactions at Zebra, which was a deal. God, that was too long ago. It was either a deal with a federal government agency or it was a deal with an offshore oil and gas company. It was one of the two. It was like neck and neck. And then when I was at BuildFax, before the acquisition, because there are guys that do insane deals at my day job, Veris, which is an incredible company that do deals much bigger than anything I ever did. But at BuildFax, I personally transacted the largest deal there as well. So yeah, 3 businesses.
That's so. And do you use the same framework everywhere now? Like once you've done that once, do you feel like now you've just kind of improved it and made it better and it works?
Yeah.
Whatever you are, whatever industry it is, whatever vertical it is, doesn't really matter? Or do you think you have to tweak it a little bit depending on?
I mean, you need to tweak it. At the end of the day, it comes down to you need to, specifically on the big side of things, you're not going to do a really big deal unless you're solving a really big problem, right? And you're not going to be solving really big problems for people that aren't really high up in organizations. I mean, maybe you will relative to you,
right?
To you, but not necessarily for the company. And so it's all about executive alignment, a really good investment for the business to make, because at the end of the day, if you're selling, and I've found, and I'm sure there are people that will disagree with me on this or be able to point counterfactually to it. But in my experience, I've found that executives don't buy things and they're not necessarily trying to solve problems. They really allocate capital with the expectation of return. And what's that? That's an investment, right? And so you're selling investments. I don't care if it's a data product. I don't care if it's a solar system. I don't care if it's a 3D holographic imaging platform like we had at Zebra. They're making an investment with the expectation of return, and they understand that there's risk associated with that. And so they're making an investment. You're solving a meaningful problem, and you're helping people move their careers forward. If you do those 3 things and you're incredibly transparent across it, you can do those things. Because you need to, in the investment side, you need to stack rank. How are you going to help people make money, save money, decrease risk, and increase their clout, right? And you can literally value all of those things. And then you be people, a lot of times I see people shy away from the risks in a deal. Would you rather own that up front and get it all out on the table of all the ways something could go wrong and start killing your own deals? Or do you want them to, as my grandmother would have said, fret about it behind closed doors when you're not there, right?
Right.
So talk about all the risks in your proposal and kill your own deals as often as early and often as possible. And then align them all to someone's personal career goals. Because you're selling to people at the end of the day. And you need to understand all of those 3 things. And if you do that and you're wildly transparent, you can those skills translate, right?
Is that how you've become? Is that the executive whisperer?
The executive transparently?
Yeah.
The executive whisperer, I think that was something that like I came up with Adam, my friend,
I think that's so catchy. That is
our
so
mutual
catchy.
friend, Adam Boyd. I think there's
Yes.
probably a deep text thread on my phone somewhere where he was like, nah, call the finance thing that. I was like, all right.
No, I think that's so catchy. It's such a good story. It's like, but this is the recipe of how to for somebody to pay attention, right? Because all the noise these days, like no one really takes the time to do that. So what were you hired to do at BuildFax? And then what did you end up doing? Like what were your triumphs or failures there?
But I was recruited away from Brightergy because my good friend and mentor Dave Perry from Zebra called me and he said, "Hey, I have a deal I need you to look at. One of my guys is just got a COO gig and is looking for a sales leader." And so the other thing to remember, LinkedIn world is like business and especially tech, really everything. It's a team sport at the end of the day. And so like I was really, really privileged. Dave is a legend in the Austin tech scene. I mean, the guy has built some of the best sales organizations and helped build and sell some of the best things out there. And he runs an incredible company now. But he called me because one of his guys and his like on the Dave Perry team got a promotion and needed a guy. And so they recruited me down to run the sales org and to build that sales organization. That was my first time actually running a full cycle soup to nuts closing team because I had been an individual contributor. I had built the SDR organization and market. I ended up having like 19-ish direct reports at Brightergy because I was running inside sales, what would be known as biz dev and in the business technology infrastructure group as well, because I was doing all of the systems. So I was literally building and architecting the technology backends that allowed us to scale to that over 50 million a year in sales. I actually got to 75, but we couldn't recognize all the revenue. So I built all that entire technical infrastructure there too. So that meant Salesforce, Marketo, InsideSales.com, engineering and architecting that entire thing. I ran that project. So I did all of that, but I had never, and then I grew into like a strategy leadership role, as well as running like a small P&L for them. But I had never managed outside salespeople and closers, right? That had not been in my skill set. And Dave knew that. And he was like, "Well, I think you're ready for it. You've done all the other things."
Wow.
And so I worked with a great guy I was recruited by an awesome guy named Jonathan Kanarak, who was COO, and ended up meeting the great and powerful Holly Tchaikovsky, who was the CEO of BuildFax. And they hired me to come in and be a sales leader for them. And they were a big private equity backed business. And it was like had a sales position. And that grew into a VP of sales position and then like a larger executive role. But it was the entire time it was hiring a team, building the strategy, closing the deals myself, everything. I've never been and this is not a dig at all. I have amazing respect for people that do this. I've never been the VP of sales or CRO in a business that has like 12 layers of leadership and things like that. I've always been on the small to medium size.
Gotcha.
Always been personally transacting things as well as all the other things.
So you have your hand on that. So what did you accomplish from the numbers perspective or growth perspective? Anything kind of what did you do while you were there?
Yeah, we 3x the revenue in 3 years and sold the business. So
that's a pretty good claim.
Yeah, it was a pretty good claim.
What majority of the business were the deals kind of larger size? They
were larger size. So the strategy we ended up implementing was we had a few highly capable enterprise sellers. So it was a small team, but they were really, really freaking good. And we ended up just selling larger deals. So like think mid 6 figures into low 7 figure data deals with large insurance companies and investment funds.
Okay.
Was the play. And it was really, really good. And it was all about the key there was hiring amazing talent. And I mean, there's a lot of things we did right, and there's a lot of things we did wrong. But hiring really, really good people, having a team that really everyone was willing to get into the trenches and do the hard work. And it was all about figuring out how. I think the big thread there was layering all those other things, but really, I think one of the biggest takeaways I had there was we had to get really, really deep on how our clients were making money, saving money, and de-risking things with it. Because we had a data product. We were selling like the least sexy thing in the world, which is like construction permit data. Right?
How do you make that sexy? Right.
Right. And the only way you make it sexy, I don't know if you can say sexy anymore. I'm sorry.
Whatever.
But the way we can make it
haters can
attractive
hate.
to our clients
Mhm.
was by figuring out exactly how they were going to be monetizing it and how they were going to be utilizing it. And I'm going to speak a lot less about that because we ended up selling that business and I still work it there. And so some of the proprietary ways our clients use the data I can't talk about, or I probably could, but I don't want to risk it. But it ended up being like exactly like, if we give you guys a bunch of building permits, how are you going to extract value from it? Well, they would do things like figure out the age of all the roofs in their insurance book. That's a product we have and built. And so it wasn't just a building permit, it was the age of the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is the age of the roof important? Well, the age of the roof is really important because 30% of insurance claims come from hail damage. And hail damage is greatly impacted by the age and quality of the roof. So we built insights on top of that data in order to go and sell that. And it was figuring out not we sell this product, but what the benefit that our clients were getting from it, and really pinpointing that was the big thing.
You're blowing my mind right now because here's so you've mastered the art of kind of storytelling, taking the product or service, right? And it's like, how do I make it a story that resonates with people? Because a lot of times, like you explain something so complex, but I understand the roof, I understand the hail. Like, how do you make it super complex? How do you take something super complex and make it super simple? And it sounds like I've never been an enterprise seller.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not where I shine. But it sounds like to become the enterprise seller and to keep climbing and closing bigger deals, you got to be really good at taking complex things and making it more simple. Is that, I mean, maybe it's too simple, but
no, you're 100% right. Like there's one of my favorite movies is this movie called A River Runs Through It. And it's the story of a family and like the arc of their lives. And it's got a bunch of amazing actors in it. It's got a young Brad Pitt in it.
Oh, we'll say no more.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Choice. Right. But there's this great scene where the father, like this is like in the American frontier, kind of, I think like around World War I. And the father is this Presbyterian preacher and he's teaching his kids how to write. And so he had these two young boys and they would write this like paper on something. And he would take it and he would look at it, he would crumble it up and he would throw it away and he'd say shorter. And then they would go back, they would write it again. And he would take it and he'd crumble it up and he'd throw it away and he'd say more concise. And he would just coach it and get it down and down and down and down. And then eventually like he reads it and he says, okay, now you can go. And they would run out and they would go fly fish. But like, that's the thing, right? You've got to take something and synthesize the concept to a point that it is valuable and emotive to the people that matter, right? It can't just be short. It has to be short and valuable to them in a way that it's beneficial to the minute hits them. And so like if you're selling into executives, it's got to tie into their corporate goals, right? And how do you find that out? If they're a publicly traded business, well, their investor day presentations, their 10Ks, their earnings calls, they're going to talk about things that matter to them, right? And when you talk to them, you need to figure out, like, is that just window dressing? And are you just trying to make Wall Street happy? Or is that a big thing? And they're like, no, it's actually like, we're tying it to this $4 billion project. And if we don't hit that, then we're screwed in 36 months.
Well, it's interesting because you're tying this to executives' KPIs, because KPIs tell like the story. Like if the KPIs are important to them, there's a reason for that. If you understand what the KPIs are, then you can start having conversation about that. Because like I guarantee you, like 9 out of 10 would not ask that question, right? And so like because they're following their script or they're following whatever framework they need to have. So when you look at enterprise, so you became an enterprise seller. It wasn't like you were born that way.
Definitely not.
Right. And so when you look at people now that have not been enterprise sellers, but they want to be enterprise sellers, what would be the advice like for them? Or how would you take a chance on somebody if they've never done that before to bring them on board to the company that's growing and teach them how to do it? Like, how would you go around that?
So I think there's a couple of things. So one is, and I talk a lot every year or so. I get the privilege of talking with a bunch of TCU students, and I have this conversation, right? And it's one is that like it's going to depend on the risk propensity that your business has, right? Big public companies will take less of a chance on people, not all the time, but most of the time, than a startup will, right?
Yep.
So you need to figure that out. And the big things I tell people to develop are one, like a financial acumen, because Warren Buffett says it, right? Accounting is the language of business. And really at the end of the day, finance is the language of sales, right? Because if you're selling something large enough, then that's what you're talking about. You're talking about internal rates of return. You're talking about hurdle rates. You're talking about net present value. You're talking about all of that important stuff at the end of the day. And so you want to get a basic financial acumen. I look for people that really love playing games, because at the end of the day, like the job of the enterprise seller is to figure out what game you're playing. And you're not going to be necessarily playing the game you want to play. You're playing whatever game the customer is playing. You want to figure out the game, and you want to figure out all the rules to the game, right? So what's the evaluation? What's the buying process? What's the timing on it? Who are all the players in it? Do you have procurement? Do you have legal? Do you have engineering? Do you have an incumbent, right? Like, who are all the players on the game? And then you want to figure out the rules, and you want to constantly be evaluating that. So I love people that love playing Settlers of Catan, that grew up playing Monkey Island, that play StarCraft and all this like crazy strategic stuff, because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a big strategic game.
Interesting. Financial acumen, playing games.
Yeah. And then you want people that are really comfortable being uncomfortable and that like telling stories, right? Interesting people make really good enterprise sellers. Like I talk to these enterprise sellers, and a lot of the best ones have lived really interesting lives. Like they've done cool stuff. Like they did random things early in their career. Like they were a DJ, or they had friends that they traveled all over the world and did stupid stuff. They worked in the military. They worked in the oil patch. Like they have things that people are willing to engage on and have fun with, right? They're not people that have done like the most boring, normal things. I can't think of a single enterprise seller I know that's successful that's not just like a really interesting person to begin with.
That is so interesting. You're saying that. Recently, I just had an interviewed a candidate for one of our clients, and he was one of those enterprise kind of sellers, and he was so interesting. Like my job as an interviewer is never get involved too much with the candidate, but he was so interested that I kept like not slapping myself. I'm like, okay, stay out of it. Like, but he's like pulling you in the story all the time, and those are like, I'm like, the clients are going to eat it up. Like they're going to be like, they're going to love it. They're going to love having dinner with him. It's just going to be like, but you have to be mindful of, he was really good at telling the story that was tied to whatever question we asked. Not just like some random boring stories, like they had to be tied somehow. So
definitely.
Fascinating. So comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's, you said that multiple times.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add to like what makes a great enterprise salesperson? Because I have questions about.
Yeah, they're willing. I learned this from Jim Steele. Jim Steele is president of Salesforce. I've had the privilege of talking to him on the phone like a few times. And I asked him when I was really early in my career, I was like, what do you look for? He's like, you got to have somebody that can bird dog it. And I was like, what does that mean? He's like, he's like, you don't need someone that knows all the answers. Oftentimes that person is actually less valuable. You want the person that can go find all of the answers for you and for the client. And that person that will just maniacally manage the process, like play the game, and will be humble enough to say, I have no clue. I don't know the answer to that. Could be a technical thing, could be a contractual thing, could be anything. But I will go find that out for you. The best people can do that all day long inside of an organization. They're willing to be the ignorant person that's willing to work hard for the solution and get it done. Because I remember I asked him, I was like, he's like, I've had 2 or 3 of my guys come into the company that he was at the time. And the first 90 days, they've done the biggest deals this company has ever seen. I was like, how? And he's like, they understand how to play the game, and they know how to bird dog things and just go find answers and find solutions.
Did you say bird dog?
Bird dog, yeah. It's like
is it like
it's
American
a hunting
slang?
summit, right? Where if you have a bird dog and you're out here in Texas and you go dove hunting or you go duck hunting, you'll have your dogs with you that will like walk into a field and they'll get all the birds to fly out, and then they'll go find the bird after you harvest it. So,
interesting. Well, so to me it's fascinating because that's the bridge, right? Everybody wants enterprise salesperson, but very few people want to pay, especially when they're growing, pay for the good enterprise salesperson, right? So how do you like see like what are the, because there's plenty of people who want to jump from being, a sales executive of, mid-size or whatever to enterprise. So this is an interesting bridge to look for the skill set to like build them up and kind of hire them.
Two thoughts there. One is if I was talking to a friend that was a CEO of a company that had a limited budget and was looking to bring on people, I would tell them to look for people. Number one, they're coachable and they're humble. They're not like whiny, they're humble. There's a difference, right? They're coachable, they're humble, and they really want to learn, and they have a track record of doing that. A track record of learning on the job and expanding from there. The other thing I'll say is like some of the best enterprise, like if you look at my career for becoming an enterprise seller, it did not start and end in tech, right? There was that divergence into solar for 5 years. There are a ton of incredible enterprise salespeople. And I say this for you, for clients, 90% of the economy is not tech.
Right.
Tech makes up about 10% of the US GDP today. The rest is everything else, right? And there are so many amazing salespeople that sell millions and millions and millions of dollars of deals, bigger than any AWS contract that's ever going to be out there, that sell capital equipment, that sell aircraft, that sell avionics, all kinds of stuff, right? And don't limit yourself to one thing, right? Because like I have friends that are CEOs of massive, industrial businesses, and they'll hire from anywhere. And and guess what? Those guys make more money than freaking most people.
I will record it and I will play this for all the prospects that come to me and say, I want this industry, only this industry, and this industry.
No way.
Never. It's like,
no,
you don't. You want somebody who
the best executives I know out there hire high performers from any industry. If they know how to learn, right?
Yeah.
If you want someone with a Rolodex, then you got to stay in industry. If you're not hiring for Rolodex or hiring for talent, you can get people from any industry. It does not matter.
Right. And there's so many studies that just show that Rolodex these days is not as valuable as you think it is. You know, it's just
Here's the
like,
thing. Rolodex is super freaking valuable. There's no two ways about it. But if I had to pick between skill, effort, and another industry and Rolodex, I might go with the skill and effort.
yeah. I mean, again, it's an interesting, it's a completely different topic. I want to talk about your class. So your training that you've made based on everything you've done. Are you good for about 10 more minutes? Because I know
Sure.
we're okay.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about it because now you're teaching what you learned, not just to lucky people who work with you at the company, but you're also opened it up to people that just want to come and learn in general, right? And so kind of what have you learned from that? So like, first of all, why did you want to do that? And then what are you learning from that right now?
I wanted to do it because our mutual friend, Adam Boyd,
Love him.
said, Chris, you should make this into a course. Because he and I were talking, I think over lunch one day, or maybe we were like camping. And he was like, you really need to like turn this finance thing into a course. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And he was like, yeah. And so I basically made like I made a couple of years ago, I made the $1 Million Deal Maker Toolkit, which is functionally like finance for salespeople. And it teaches people everything they need to know to have that high level C-suite conversation on the financial piece, right? So how to present your products and services as something that executive teams can invest in, and how to have that conversation, how to build the spreadsheets for internal rates of return and net present value calculations and talk people through it, how to listen to an earnings call quickly and understand what matters to a client or a prospect, how to read a 10K, how to dig in and have those financial conversations. So I made that. And then actually my old CEO years ago asked me to work with some of her friends' people. And that got me started, that every now and then I take like an hour a week and I work with, sellers from, all over the world to basically do like enterprise sales and finance for sales 101. And we run that in 8-week cycles. And I do that a couple of times a year for like an hour a week. And I'm really privileged. And the thing I love about that is one, like, it helps me keep my skill set sharp. I'll be totally honest, right? Like, one of the big things that I like to get out of it is it keeps me sharp. Teaching people things keeps you doing it, right?
Yep.
There's a different side of the muscle from applying it to teaching it. And so I love it because it keeps me sharp. And I love it because I get to help other people learn a process that they can apply to their own businesses and see lots of success. And that has been really rewarding over the years to do. So it's been a lot of fun.
So and they come from all kinds of verticals, from what I understand, and all kinds of. Have you helped to make a 7-figure deal person yet? Like in other words, they came to you, they only sold 6 figures, and then after that they were like, oh, now I know how to do this, and then
that's been really fun to see.
Wow, that's amazing.
There's some fun stuff buried in my LinkedIn recommendations if people ever want to go through it, of some really neat stories.
It's to me, I'm even like reading your newsletter, like it always makes me think like, oh wow, this is happening. Like the way you bring numbers into that and finance into that is that education that I think many companies don't make their salespeople go through. So let's kind of wrap this up right now, because there's so many juicy things that we talked about today, but we talked a lot about sales skill set, right? Like how do you tool yourself up to become to kind of like, you started at State Farm, you kind of learned how to sell, and then you kind of moved up, and so you worked a lot on your sales skill set, and you are where you are today because you've been developing the sales skill set. But another thing we talk about, to our clients, is that there's a sales mindset, right? So you can develop skill set all you want, but if your mindset is not right, forget it. And money is a big part of sales mindset. Like, talk numbers, talk money, ask uncomfortable questions. So what do you do for your, like, did you always have a great mindset? Do you have to work on this every day? Like, what's your mindset what do you do on your mindset? How do you keep on evolving and growing and closing bigger and bigger deals?
It's something that I have to constantly work at. Like, I'll just be completely honest. And you have to realize that the only limits for your success are the limits that you put on yourself. And if you want to put limits on yourself, that's fine. Just know that you're doing that. And then on the sales side specifically, it's making sure people understand that what is a lot of money to you is not necessarily even a meaningful amount of money to your prospects. And you need to understand that. And I always coach people to ask, what's a lot of money to your business and what's a meaningful amount of money to your business? Because they're different, right? For one company, a lot of money might be a couple $100 million. A meaningful amount of money in doing a transaction might be 60,000, right? But then asking why, and just understanding overall from a mindset standpoint that like the limits you have are limits that you put on yourself, and to understand that like I don't remember who told me it, but I'll never forget, like, never sell from your own pocketbook.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Like, I think I learned it at State Farm, right? And it was because people would be like, oh, I don't want to sell like a life insurance policy that's $500 a month. And it'd be like, because like as a rep, you might be making, if you're starting out, you might be making like $3,000 a month, right? And so that's a lot of money. You have no idea what's a lot of money or what's a meaningful amount of money to your client to solve that problem. And so never sell from your own wallet, your own pocketbook. Like, it's like, because you just have no clue. Like, and so once I started moving past that, that was the first thing that let me get past it. And then just like, don't have any issue or concern talking about what you consider to be large numbers. Because at the end of the day, it might be a really big number to someone. It might not be.
You don't know.
Don't sell yourself short.
So do you have a practice every day that you kind of like, what do you do on a daily basis or weekly basis for your mindset, or kind of
mindset? I read my Bible every day. I'm a follower of Jesus. That's really important to me. And so I read my Bible every day, and like, I just do what I can to surround myself with positive people and to like work on myself. And that means I love running. I run multiple times a week. I exercise. I do all that basic stuff to just make sure that like I'm putting myself in tough positions so that, whatever comes at me isn't the hardest thing I've done.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I did not ask you?
This has been awesome.
Or anything that you think would be helpful for people to know?
I think
that I didn't address or we didn't talk
about. The only
other
thing I would say is like, I cannot stress enough, like for salespeople looking for companies, you've got to get on the right team. I would not have the career I've had or the success that I've had I not worked with amazing people, right? Like, you don't make it alone. I thought for the longest time I could figure it out on my own and I could do it. And it's like, you have to work with incredible people. I am so privileged to work with so many smart people every day. And I have been for years. And if you're not like, you're not going to be successful if you're not working with great people that are really good team members. I'm sure there's someone out there that is the world's greatest solo deal maker or door-to-door salesperson, and more power to you. But like, getting on the right team and working with amazing people that you can feed off of and that you can learn from, and that carry themselves with integrity and hold you to the same account, is like one of the best things you can do.
But it also works the other way. And clearly, yeah. I mean, you've talked about being comfortable with being uncomfortable. People notice that. They start noticing that they can count on you, that you will get it done, you will figure it out, and that's, you start having a reputation. So great people like to work with great people. So that speaks, volumes for you. All right. So where can people find you? Kind of, what do you have going on? Anything you want to share that's exciting?
Find me on LinkedIn. I post occasionally, not as much as I used to by any means. Chris at chrisschaum.com if you're interested in joining the courses we put together every couple times a year. And that's CHRIS at CHRISSCHAUM.com. Sorry, need more coffee.
It's a German way of spelling things.
It
So there you
is.
go.
It is. It's a German for foam or head of a beer.
Oh,
So
there you go. All right.
there you
Well,
go.
listen. Well, thanks so much for coming. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. I'm sure would love to have you again. Maybe next year, come
definitely.
over and maybe
Be a
share some
blast.
other things you've got going on. And on this note, stay for a second while I get off the live. But I appreciate you so much. So many golden nuggets that I'll be making into short videos after
Thanks
this.
so much.
So, bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.